History is often told through battles, great leaders, and pivotal moments, but what if I told you some of the most unbelievable events are the ones you've never heard of? Imagine a pig being put on trial for murder, a war waged against emus and lost, or one of the greatest conquerors in history being humiliated by a swarm of rabbits. These bizarre moments remind us that the past is full of surprises. Today, we're diving deep into the most absurd and jaw-dropping events in history that will leave you questioning how much of what we know is stranger than fiction. Stick around. You won't believe what happened next. On August 27, 1896, the Anglo-Zanzibar War broke out between Britain and Zanzibar, and it ended just 38 minutes later. This resulted in one British sailor being wounded, while around 500 Zanzibaris, both military and civilian, were either wounded or killed. This is considered the shortest war in history, lasting less than half the duration of a soccer match. At U.S. President Andrew Jackson's funeral in 1845, his pet African gray parrot had to be removed from the service because it was swearing loudly, disturbing the solemnity of the occasion. Imagine trying to mourn the president only to be interrupted by his potty-mouthed parrot. Following the death of Israel's first president in November 1952, the presidency was offered to none other than Albert Einstein. Einstein, however, declined the offer, stating that he didn't have the natural aptitude to deal with people, a rather fitting explanation for the brilliant but introverted physicist. Interestingly, Einstein wasn't even from Israel, which makes the offer even more surprising. Rome's infamous tyrant, Caligula, once threatened to make his favorite horse a senator, claiming it would do a better job than the human senators. Though he was assassinated before he could carry out this bizarre plan, rumors suggest that he was entirely serious about it. Unfortunately, he didn't live long enough to see it through. In 1820, the town of Salem, Massachusetts, infamous for its witch trials, held a trial to determine whether or not tomatoes were poisonous. The case was settled when Colonel Robert Gibbon Johnson ate a basket of tomatoes and suffered no ill effects. While Salem's trial against tomatoes is far less sinister than its trials against witches, it's ironic that this superstitious town was the one to finally put the poisonous tomato myth to bed. King Henry VIII of England had a groom of the stool, whose job was, quite literally, to wipe the king's backside after he used the toilet. Incredibly, all 4 individuals who served in this rather unfortunate role were knighted. It's worth noting that these men stuck around longer than Henry's 6 wives. In the 13th century, Pope Gregory IX declared that cats were associated with devil worship and ordered their extermination. Many historians believe this led to an increase in the transmission of the bubonic plague due to the growing rat population. Though it's been suggested that the plague spread too rapidly for rats to be the sole culprits, Gregory's mass extermination of cats remains a questionable decision. After all, cats are pretty cool. In ancient Asia, and even up until the 19th century, a popular method of execution was death by elephant. These majestic creatures were trained to inflict slow, painful deaths, or alternatively, to execute people with large blades attached to their tusks. It's certainly a cultural practice that made sense at the time, but seems utterly bizarre today. Believe it or not, the Volkswagen Beetle was commissioned by none other than Adolf Hitler. The car was intended to be a practical and affordable vehicle that the working class could easily afford. In 46 BCE, the year lasted 445 days by decree of Julius Caesar, who added 2 extra leap months to align the calendar with the seasons. The format that followed laid the groundwork for the 365-day, 6-hour calendar we use today. Cuban dictator Fidel Castro survived over 600 assassination attempts during his lifetime. Some of the methods used to try to kill him were absurdly creative, ranging from a poisoned diving suit to an exploding cigar. Despite these plots, Castro lived to the ripe old age of 90, passing away in 2016. During Prohibition, the U.S. government took drastic measures to stop illegal alcohol consumption. Frustrated by bootleggers stealing industrial alcohol to turn it into drinking spirits, officials responded by poisoning the alcohol. This led to the deaths of at least 10,000 people by the time Prohibition ended in 1933. It was an extreme response, to say the least. Tsutomu Yamaguchi, a 29-year-old naval engineer, was in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, when the first atomic bomb was dropped. Amazingly, he survived, despite being just 2 miles from ground zero. The next day, he boarded a train home to Nagasaki, and on August 9th, the second atomic bomb fell. Once again, Yamaguchi survived. It's said that he was recounting his experience in Hiroshima to his colleagues when the Nagasaki bomb hit, interrupting the conversation. It's hard to say if he was incredibly lucky or incredibly unlucky, but he lived a long life, passing away at the age of 93 in 2010. The Voynich manuscript, carbon dated to between 1404 and 1438, still confounds scientists and historians. Written in an unidentified language, it's unclear whether it was intended as a code or a hoax designed to confound future historians. If it was a hoax, the effort was impressive. It spans 240 pages, complete with strange foldouts and illustrations of unrecognizable plants and animals. American President Lyndon B. Johnson reportedly continued his meetings and interviews while using the toilet, often inviting reporters and aides into the bathroom while exposing his presidential self. It's safe to assume that made for some uncomfortable experiences for everyone involved except Johnson. In 1985, oceanography professor Robert Ballard embarked on a mission to find the wreckage of the RMS Titanic, which sank in 1912. However, that wasn't his main objective. The mission was actually a front for searching for nuclear submarines lost in the 1960s. Having completed the real mission sooner than expected, Ballard's team went on to discover the Titanic on September 1st, 1985. When forks were introduced to Italy in the 11th century, religious leaders deemed them blasphemous, arguing that eating with artificial hands was offensive to God. It's hard to believe that such a trivial matter could stir religious outrage, but it did. According to medical records, Adolf Hitler regularly took up to 30 different drugs to combat an embarrassing and uncontrollable flatulence problem. Between 1898 and 1910, heroin was legally distributed as a cough medicine. Of course, the side effects led to a bit more than just cough relief. In the 1930s, Australia technically went to war with emus. At one point, the army found a group of 1,000 emus and attempted to kill them. The emus, however, won the battle, and this bizarre conflict is now remembered as the Great Emu War. In 1866, the tiny nation of Liechtenstein sent out an army of 80 soldiers to participate in the Austro-Prussian War. When the war ended, none of the soldiers had been killed, and in fact, they returned with an extra man, a new friend they'd made along the way. The country disbanded its army 2 years later and has remained neutral ever since, which is probably for the best, considering their overwhelming power. In 1386, France, a remarkable event took place. A pig was arrested, put on trial, and sentenced to death for killing a child. While animal trials were not unusual in the Middle Ages, imagining such a case happening today feels utterly bizarre and almost unbelievable. Napoleon Bonaparte, one of history's most formidable conquerors, faced a rather embarrassing defeat in July 1807, not on the battlefield, but at the hands of a horde of rabbits. During a rabbit hunt he had organized for himself and his men, things took a comical turn when, instead of fleeing, the released rabbits charged straight at Napoleon. In a bizarre twist, the mighty emperor suddenly found himself being chased by an army of bunnies, turning the hunter into the hunted. In Strasbourg in 1518, a dancing mania gripped the locals, with many dancing uncontrollably for days on end, some even until they died. This strange phenomenon lasted 2 months and remains one of the most mysterious cases of mass hysteria in history. History is full of strange, unexpected twists, reminding us that the past is anything but predictable. From tyrants and tomatoes to war with emus, it proves that truth really can be stranger than fiction. If you enjoyed these wild historical stories, let us know your favorite moment in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us here on History, intrigued for more unbelievable tales from the pages of history.